A wrestler's final match is perhaps the most important match they will ever have. Their final match should represent their career, and the last match they should have should emulate that. However, the perfect retirement match doesn't always occur, and sometimes a WWE legend can go out by having one of their worst ever matches. But which ones were they? Well, join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 of the worst final matches that WWE would like fans to forget. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 10. Mick Foley. A hardcore legend, Mick Foley has come out of retirement a number of times over the years. He came out of retirement for a bizarre run in TNA, and he's even made various appearances in the Royal Rumble match, but Foley's last official WWE match outside of a Rumble cameo actually took place on Raw. Yeah, that's right, Foley had one of his final ever appearances in the WWE by wrestling on Raw. Fans often consider Foley's acclaimed WrestleMania 22 match with Edge to be his final WWE match, and probably that's the best way to look at Foley's retirement, but his last ever match on Raw took place in 2008, and it saw him team with Hornswoggle to take on the Highlanders in a rather brief match that showed fans why Foley didn't need to be an in-ring talent anymore. Number 9. Patterson and Gerald Briscoe. During the Attitude Era, iconic wrestlers Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe became on-air characters known as the Stooges. They would act as Vince McMahon's right-hand men, and they were incredibly entertaining as a duo. The two actually had a match against each other on pay-per-view at the King of the Ring in 2000, and it would be their last official in-ring match of both of their respective careers. Unfortunately, the match is considered to be one of the worst matches of the era, as it was a hardcore evening gown match. The two wrestlers wore women's clothing and proceeded to perform unfunny spots for around 3 minutes before Crash Holly interjected himself into the match. The match was for the hardcore title, meaning the 24/7 ruling was in full effect. The match was a terrible way for Patterson and Briscoe to go out, but at least they retired in a match against one another, which is something, I guess. Number 8. JBL. A former WWE champion, JBL is actually one of the only WWE stars in history to stick to his retirement plea. Well, that is if you don't count his brief cameo in the 2014 Royal Rumble. JBL would have his final WWE match at WrestleMania 25, taking on his arch-nemesis Rey Mysterio for the Intercontinental title. JBL would be squashed in the match by Rey, losing in just 22 seconds, and then he would proceed to get on the mic and inform the audience that he was quitting WWE. Now, although it was great to see JBL put a talent of the nature of Rey over in his match, at the time fans expected much more. JBL had been a top guy for the past 5 years, and he could have done so much more with his retirement storyline. Number 7. Taz. One of the top feuds heading into the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view in 2006 was between Jerry Lawler and Taz. Lawler had been bad-mouthing ECW, and Taz would consequently stand up for the brand that made him and challenge Lawler to a match on the pay-per-view. When the match was announced, Taz hadn't wrestled in a number of years, and it was clear that he wasn't in any condition to have a full-blown match. Therefore, they just decided to have him go just 30 seconds in length. Lawler would be distracted by Joey Styles, and this would allow Taz to lock in the Taz mission to secure the submission victory. This would end up being Taz's last ever match, as he would decide enough was enough. It was disappointing to see Taz go out in such a lackluster manner, but it was evidently clear at this point that Taz was more than satisfied in being a commentator for the rest of his career. Number 6. Sid. Sid shocked the world in 2012 when he randomly showed up on Raw to face Heath Slater. Sid hadn't been seen in WWE since 1997. It was unclear what the relationship was between Sid and Vince McMahon. Nevertheless, Sid made his return to the company, and the match with Slater would end up being Sid's last ever match. The match itself was a basic squash match, but it was a clear disconnect from the crowd. A lot of the crowd didn't seem to know who Sid even was, and this resulted in a lot of Sid's signature offense receiving little to just no reaction. Number 5. The Rock. Although there's been a ton of speculation surrounding The Rock wrestling again, with a match against Roman Reigns being rumoured for a number of years, at this stage it's unclear if this is ever going to happen. The Rock remains one of the biggest and most successful leading men in Hollywood, and The Rock would have to commit a lot of time to WWE in order to make that match ever happen. Well, this meant that if The Rock decides to remain retired, his last ever match would be against Eric Rowan. This was the infamous match that took place at WrestleMania 32, and it saw The Rock challenge a member of the Wyatt family to a match, which was happily accepted by Rowan. Rowan was then soundly defeated by the Great One in a record-breaking 6 seconds, a record that hasn't been beaten to this very day. Number 4. Vince McMahon. WrestleMania 38 received widespread praise from fans, as well as great matches on the card. The pay-per-view itself featured completely unexpected moments. and one of these was Chairman Vince McMahon wrestling again. Following Pat McAfee's victory over Austin Theory, Vince would then challenge Pat to an impromptu match. They would then proceed to have a short 3-minute match that actually resulted in Vince securing the victory. The match featured interference from Theory, and this would ultimately allow the 76-year-old to pick up his first ever WrestleMania win in what will no doubt be his final in-ring match ever. Although the match wasn't the best, the post-match antics saw Stone Cold Steve Austin deliver one last stunner to the villainous McMahon, even though it was one of the worst stunners ever performed. Number 3. Kurt Angle. There was a lot of buzz when Kurt Angle announced that he'd be retiring at WrestleMania 35. Angle was one of the greatest in-ring talents in WWE history, and there was a lot of hype surrounding who Angle's final opponent would be. Fans hoped it would be John Cena, as Cena was rumored for the show, and Cena made his WWE debut in a match against Angle all the way back in 2002. However, WWE had other ideas, and instead, they booked Angle's final ever opponent to be Baron Corbin. Angle and Corbin had been feuding for a number of months, but the feud wasn't remotely interesting, and it certainly didn't warrant a WrestleMania match. Nevertheless, WWE persisted, and WWE had Angle lose to Corbin on the grandest stage of WrestleMania. The match fell completely flat, the crowd didn't care, and the former WWE Champion and Hall of Famer ultimately deserved a better send-off. Number 2. Bret Hart. Bret Hart's 2010 return to WWE was a long time coming and something that never seemed possible, as following the Montreal Screwjob in '97, WWE and Bret Hart had cut ties with each other, but in 2010, Bret was finally in a position to agree to a return to the company. Due to Bret's health, he was unable to perform at the level he was once able to, and he was actually unable to take a single bump during his second run in the company. Bret would feature in a number of matches, including a match against Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26 and even a US title match and subsequent win over The Miz. However, Bret's final match came in 2011 when he teamed with John Cena to take on the duo of Alberto Del Rio and Ricardo Rodriguez on Raw. Bret would win the match for his all-star team, but by performing the worst-looking sharpshooter on Ricardo. It was a sad sight to see Bret wrestle in such a lackluster way, and fans probably wish to remember Bret during his days of full health. And number 1. Shawn Michaels. In terms of a perfect retirement match, there may have been none better than Shawn Michaels' retirement match against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 26. The match was close to perfection, and it was a satisfying close to the legendary career of Mr. WrestleMania. However, 8 years later, he decided to come out of retirement for one more match. For the Crown Jewel pay-per-view in 2018, HBK would come out of retirement to team with Triple H to face the Brothers of Destruction. Now, his decision was met with much criticism from fans, as it was clear that HBK was doing it for the money and nothing more. The match itself was absolutely terrible. It featured a ton of botches, and a bald HBK wasn't the performer he was 8 years prior. HBK has shied away from mentioning the match in interviews, but he has admitted he regrets doing the match and wishes he remained retired following WrestleMania 26 in 2010. But there you have it, folks, 10 of the worst final matches WWE would love fans to forget. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.